The voicemail arrived at 7:30 on a Tuesday morning. Just as I was pouring my second cup of coffee, the painter's voice carried an edge of uncertainty that made my hand freeze mid-pour. "Mrs. Chun, this is Marcus from Precision Paint and Design. I'm here at the Riverside property like we scheduled, but I need to ask you something. You mentioned nobody lives here anymore, correct? Because I'm standing in the driveway right now, and I can see lights on inside. Multiple rooms. And I'm pretty sure I just saw someone walk past the upstairs window. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." I set down the coffee pot with more force than necessary, my pulse quickening in that particular way that signals something has gone terribly wrong. The Riverside house, my childhood home where I'd grown up, where my mother had lived until her passing 4 months ago, was supposed to be completely empty. I'd spent 3 weekends clearing it out myself, boxing up 52 years of accumulated memories, donating furniture, arranging estate sales. The utilities were scheduled for disconnection next week. The house was listed with a realtor who assured me we'd have offers within days given the desirable neighborhood. Nobody, absolutely nobody, should be inside that house. "Marcus, don't go inside," I said, my voice sharper than I intended as I called him back immediately. "Stay in your truck. I'm calling the police right now." But even as I said it, my mind raced through other possibilities. Had I forgotten to lock up after my last visit? Had the realtor shown the property and left it unsecured? Or was this something more sinister, squatters or thieves who'd noticed the for sale sign and assumed easy pickings? 20 minutes later, I was in my car speeding toward Riverside, having spoken with both the police and Marcus twice more. The painter, bless him, had remained parked across the street, watching the house with the dedication of a security guard despite my insistence that he could leave and we'd reschedule. "No ma'am," he'd said firmly. "If someone's broken into your family home, I'm not leaving until the police arrive. My mother would haunt me if I did." The Riverside house sat on a quiet street lined with mature oak trees, their branches creating a canopy that dappled the sidewalks with shifting patterns of light and shadow. I'd walked the street thousands of times as a child, riding my bike to the corner store, playing hopscotch with the neighborhood kids, later walking home from dates with boys my mother pretended not to notice watching from the living room window. The house itself was a modest craftsman-style bungalow with a wide front porch where Mom had kept pots of geraniums, and a porch swing that creaked in a rhythm I could still hear in my dreams. As I pulled up behind the police cruiser already parked in front, I saw Marcus leaning against his white van, arms crossed, watching 2 officers approach the front door. He was younger than I'd expected from his voice, maybe early 30s, with paint-speckled work pants and an expression of genuine concern that made me feel slightly less alone in this moment. "Mrs. Chun." He pushed off from the van as I approached. "I'm Marcus. I'm really sorry about all this. I should have called you before I even pulled into the driveway." "You did exactly right," I assured him, watching as one officer knocked firmly on the front door while his partner moved around to check the back. "Thank you for staying." The knock echoed in the morning quiet, followed by a long silence. Then, impossibly, I heard the sound I'd grown up with, the specific creak of the old deadbolt turning, the slight scrape of the door over the threshold where the wood had swollen over decades. The door opened and my heart stopped completely. Standing in the doorway of my mother's house, wearing one of my mother's floral aprons over jeans and a sweater, was a woman I'd never seen before in my life. She was perhaps in her mid-50s, with graying hair pulled back in a loose bun and reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She looked at the police officers with confusion, not fear, and when she spoke, her voice carried the tone of someone interrupted during household chores rather than someone caught trespassing. "Can I help you, officers?" she asked, wiping her hands on the apron, my mother's apron, the one with the faded strawberries that Mom had worn every Sunday when she made her famous lemon bundt cake. "Ma'am, we received a report of a possible break-in at this address," the taller officer said, his hand resting casually on his belt. "The owner indicated this property should be vacant. Can you explain your presence here?" The woman's confusion deepened, her eyebrows drawing together. "Vacant? I'm sorry, officer, but there must be some mistake. I've been living here for 6 weeks now. I have a lease agreement and everything. Mr. Patterson arranged it all through his property management company." I felt the world tilt slightly. Mr. Patterson. Richard Patterson, my mother's lawyer. The man who'd handled her will, who'd helped me navigate the complicated process of settling her estate. The man I trusted implicitly because he'd been Mom's lawyer for over 20 years, handling everything from her divorce from my father to the purchase of this very house. "I'm the owner," I said, stepping forward, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. "I'm Helen Chun, and my mother, Margaret Chun, passed away 4 months ago. This house is part of her estate. There should be no lease, no tenant, nothing. Mr. Patterson had no authority to rent this property." The woman's face drained of color. Her hand went to her throat, fingers pressing against the base of her neck as if checking her own pulse. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Oh my God," he said. "He told me the owner was overseas, that the house needed someone to maintain it, that it was all legitimate." Her voice broke. "I gave him $6,000. First month, last month, and security deposit. I have 3 children. We were living in a motel." He said this was a fresh start. In that moment, watching this stranger's face crumble with the realization that she'd been scammed, that her fresh start was built on fraud, I felt something unexpected. Not the rage I should have felt at finding someone illegally occupying my mother's house. Not the violation that should have come with seeing a stranger wearing my mother's apron. Instead, I felt a cold, calculating fury directed entirely at Richard Patterson, attorney at law, trusted family advisor, and apparent con artist who'd taken advantage of both a grieving daughter and a desperate mother. The police took statements from everyone. The woman's name was Diana Rosales, and her story emerged in fragments between tears and apologies. Divorced 3 years ago, working 2 jobs. To support her 3 teenagers, living in an extended stay motel that was eating through her savings. She'd seen Patterson's listing online 6 weeks ago. A beautiful craftsman home in a good school district for what seemed like a reasonable rent. He'd met her here, shown her through the house, accepted her cash payment, and given her keys and a lease agreement that looked entirely legitimate. "My kids finally have their own rooms," Diana said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My daughter Isabel painted hers blue, her favorite color. My son Marco finally has space to set up his computer for his coding classes. The youngest, Sophie, she brought home straight A's on her first report card from the new school. She'd been struggling at the old one." Diana's hands twisted the apron, my mother's apron. "I thought we were finally getting somewhere." The officers confirmed that the lease was indeed fraudulent. Patterson had used official-looking letterhead from a fake property management company, forged signatures, created documentation that would fool most people. He'd collected Diana's $6,000 in cash, probably spent it immediately, and moved on to whatever his next scheme was. When the officers tried calling his office number, it rang to a disconnected line. His law office, when they sent a patrol car to check, had been cleared out, with a commercial lease violation notice taped to the door. "He's in the wind," the older officer told me privately. "We'll file a report, add it to what I'm sure will be a growing list of complaints, but between you and me, Mrs. Chan, men like this are usually 3 states away before the first victim realizes what happened. You have every legal right to evict Ms. Rosales immediately. She's technically trespassing, though given the circumstances, we're not going to arrest her unless you want to press charges." I looked over at Diana, who was sitting on the porch steps, my mother's porch steps, crying quietly while Marcus the painter stood at a respectful distance, clearly unsure whether he should leave or stay. I thought about my mother, about the story she told me of her own struggles as a single mother after my father left, working as a secretary while taking night classes to become a paralegal, scraping together the down payment for this house through sheer determination and sacrifice. I thought about the value she tried to instill in me, about fairness and compassion, and the difference between justice and cruelty. "I'm not pressing charges," I heard myself say. "But I need to think about what happens next." The officers left, providing both of us with case numbers and contact information for victim services. Marcus approached cautiously, his estimate clipboard still in hand, looking like he'd accidentally stumbled into a situation far beyond a simple painting job. "Mrs. Chun, I can come back another time," he offered. "Clearly, this isn't the moment for paint consultations." "Actually, Marcus, would you mind waiting just a few more minutes?" I asked. I might need that estimate after all, though probably not for the reasons I originally thought. I turned to Diana, who was wiping her eyes with the apron hem, and gestured to the porch swing. Can we talk? Just the two of us. She nodded mutely, and we sat together on the swing that had held 3 generations of my family. The chains creaked in their familiar rhythm as we swayed gently, and for a moment I was 8 years old again, sitting here with my mother on summer evenings, counting fireflies and talking about everything and nothing. Tell me about your kids, I said finally. Diana looked at me with red-rimmed eyes, confused by the question but answering anyway. Isabel's 16, she wants to be a veterinarian. Marco's 14, obsessed with computers and robotics. Sophie just turned 12, she's the artist of the family, always drawing or painting. She paused. They've been through so much with the divorce, with moving around, with watching me work myself to exhaustion.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
When we got this house, when they each got their own room, I saw something come back into their eyes. Hope, I guess. Now I have to tell them it's gone again. What do you do for work? I asked. I'm a medical billing specialist during the day, and I clean offices 3 evenings a week, Diana said. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills. Or it did, until I lost $6,000 to a lawyer I trusted. The bitterness in her voice was understandable. I sat in silence, the swing creaking, my mind working through a problem that had no easy solution. Diana and her children were victims of the same man who'd victimized me. They'd done nothing wrong except trust someone in a position of authority, someone whose professional credentials suggested reliability and honesty. Evicting them would solve my immediate problem of having an unauthorized occupant in my mother's house, but it would destroy a family already hanging on by their fingernails. On the other hand, this was my inheritance, my mother's legacy property that represented decades of her hard work and sacrifice. The house was meant to be sold, the proceeds split between myself and my brother Nathan, who lived in Seattle and had been texting me impatiently about when we'd close the estate. I had responsibilities, legal obligations, practical concerns. I couldn't just let someone live in my property indefinitely out of sympathy. But as I sat there on that porch swing, breathing in the familiar scent of my mother's roses blooming along the fence line, I heard her voice in my head as clearly as if she were sitting beside me. Helen, she would have said in that particular tone she used when I was being foolishly practical at the expense of being wise, money is replaceable. A child's hope is not. Diana, I said slowly, an idea forming that was probably crazy but felt somehow inevitable. I'm going to propose something unusual. I don't know if it will work, and we'd need to figure out a lot of details, but I want you to hear me out before you respond. She turned to look at me fully, wariness and desperate hope warring in her expression. What if you stayed? I continued. Not for free, and not under false pretenses. A real lease, proper paperwork, everything legitimate. But here's the thing, this house needs work before I can sell it. The exterior needs painting obviously, which is why Marcus is here. But there's also the kitchen cabinets that need refinishing, the bathroom tile that needs rerouting, the garden that's become overgrown, dozens of small projects that I don't have time to oversee from across town. I could see I had her attention now, though confusion still clouded her features. What if we structured an arrangement where you and your family could stay here, paying reduced rent, in exchange for coordinating and overseeing the renovation work? You'd work with contractors, be here for estimates and installations, maintain the property, keep it secure and lived in while the work happens. It might take several months to get everything done properly, which means your kids could finish the school year in their current schools. I don't understand, Diana said carefully. Why would you do this? I'm a stranger who's been illegally living in your mother's house. You're a victim of a crime, not a criminal, I corrected. And honestly, I'm being somewhat selfish here. I've been dreading the renovation process, trying to figure out how to manage contractors from a distance, worrying about the house sitting empty, and becoming a target for actual break-ins. If you're here, living in it, maintaining it, coordinating the work, that solves a genuine problem for me. I didn't mention the other reason, the one that was harder to articulate. That sitting here on this swing, talking to this woman who was fighting so hard to provide stability for her children, I felt closer to my mother than I had since her funeral. That mom would have done exactly this, found the solution that helped rather than hurt, that created opportunity from crisis. That perhaps this unexpected situation was a gift rather than a disaster, a chance to honor my mother's memory in a way that went beyond maintaining her property or settling her estate. Diana was quiet for a long time, the swing creaking as we moved. Finally she spoke, her voice thick with emotion. What about the $6,000 I already paid Patterson? I can't afford to pay you rent on top of that loss. I'm barely staying afloat as it is. We'll figure out something manageable, I said. Maybe $400 a month, which I know is still below market rate, but with your role in overseeing the renovations it's fair. And Diana, I'm going to pursue Patterson through every legal channel available. If we recover any money from him, you'll get your $6,000 back first, before I see a penny. I'll put that in writing. I need to think about this, Diana said, but I could see the weight lifting from her shoulders, the impossible situation becoming merely complicated. I need to talk to my kids, make sure they understand this isn't permanent, that we'll eventually need to move again when the house sells. Of course, I agreed. Take a day to think it over. Talk to your children. Maybe consult with a real lawyer, not a fraudulent one, to look over whatever agreement we draft. I stood up from the swing. In the meantime, I'm going to have Marcus give me that painting estimate, because either way, this house needs exterior work. Marcus, who'd been sitting patiently in his van scrolling through his phone, hopped out when I waved him over. We walked around the property while he took notes and measurements, pointing out areas where the paint was peeling worst, where water damage had occurred around the windows, where the trim would need to be repaired before painting could begin. Quite a morning you've had, he observed as we examined the north side of the house where shade had encouraged moss growth. That's an understatement, I agreed. Marcus, can I ask you something? Do you think I'm being incredibly foolish? He paused in his measuring, considering the question seriously. You mean about letting Ms. Rosales stay? My mom always said that foolishness is when you act without thinking, but wisdom is when you think deeply and then act with compassion. Seems to me you're doing the latter. Your mom sounds wise. She was, he said softly. Passed 2 years ago. Cancer. He cleared his throat, getting back to business. Anyway, the exterior work is going to run around $8,000 for everything: proper prep work, primer, 2 coats of quality paint, trim repair. I could break it up into phases if budget is a concern. $8,000 is fine, I said, my mind already calculating the costs of the other renovations the house would need. When could you start? Next week, weather permitting. It's a 3-week job, give or take. We exchanged contact information, and Marcus promised to email me a formal estimate by end of business day. As he packed up to leave, he paused by his van door. Mrs. Chun, for what it's worth, your mother would probably be proud of what you're doing. Not many people would respond to this situation the way you are. After he drove away, I sat in my car for a while, looking at the house that held so many memories. I could see Diana through the living room window, talking on her phone, probably to her children. The morning sun illuminated the rooms I'd grown up in, and I realized that the house felt more alive now, with Diana and her family in it, than it had during my sad, solitary visits to box up my mother's belongings. My phone buzzed with a text from my brother Nathan. Hey, any update on the house sale? Real estate agent said she hasn't heard from you in 2 weeks. We need to get this moving. I stared at the text, trying to figure out how to explain what had happened, what I was planning to do. Nathan would think I'd lost my mind. He'd probably be right. But as I started typing a response, I felt certain, in a way I hadn't felt about anything since Mom's death, that this was the right path forward. That evening, after Diana had called to accept my proposal with tearful gratitude, I drove home to my own apartment across town and did something I'd been avoiding for months. I pulled out the box of my mother's personal papers that I'd been meaning to sort through, the ones that felt too intimate to deal with in those first raw weeks of grief. Among the birthday cards I'd sent her over the years, the programs from my college graduation and my wedding, I found a journal I didn't know she'd kept. The entries were sporadic, written in my mother's careful handwriting on whatever scraps of paper had been handy, receipts and sticky notes and torn envelope backs. One entry, dated 3 years after my father left, caught my eye. Helen asked today why I don't hate her father for leaving us with nothing. How do I explain to a child that hate is a luxury I can't afford? That every moment spent hating him is a moment stolen from building our life? She'll understand someday that the opposite of love isn't hate. It's the choice to keep moving forward. Another from my teenage years. Helen is so practical, so focused on security and stability. I worry I've taught her to be afraid of risk, of uncertainty. But I want her to know that the real risk is living so carefully that you forget to be generous when it matters. And finally, one from just a year ago. Saw a woman in the grocery store today, 3 children, choosing between bread and milk because she couldn't afford both. Paid for her groceries on my way out. Helen would say I can't afford to do things like that, and she's probably right. But what's the point of having enough if you don't use it to help someone who doesn't? I closed the journal, tears streaming down my face, and knew with absolute certainty that the decision I'd made about Diana and her family was exactly what my mother would have wanted. More than that, it was what I wanted. A way to honor her legacy that went beyond maintaining property value or settling accounts. Over the next several weeks, an unexpected routine developed. I drive to the Riverside house twice a week to check on renovation progress and meet with Diana to discuss contractor schedules and decisions about fixtures and finishes. What started as awkward, formal meetings gradually evolved into something warmer, more collaborative. Diana, it turned out, had excellent taste and a practical eye for value. When I couldn't decide between expensive tile options for the bathroom, she found a discontinued style at a salvage warehouse that looked even better at a fraction of the cost. She researched kitchen cabinet painters and found a craftsman who did impeccable work for reasonable rates. She even tackled the overgrown garden herself, spending weekends clearing decades of accumulated weeds and dead plants, discovering my mother's forgotten rose bushes and reviving them with careful pruning and feeding. "I always wanted a garden," she told me one Saturday as we worked side by side, me pulling weeds while she amended the soil. In the apartment complex where we lived before the motel, plants weren't allowed, not even on balconies. Her children, when I finally met them, were exactly as she described. Isabel, serious and gentle, already volunteering at a local animal shelter. Marco, brilliant and intense, showing me the robot he was building from recycled parts. And Sophie, creative and observant, who presented me with a watercolor painting of the house that captured something essential about its character that I'd never quite been able to articulate. "It's for you," Sophie said shyly when I admired it. "Because it's your house, but you're letting us live in it, and that's really nice." I had the painting framed and hung it in my own apartment, where it became the first thing I saw every morning. Marcus proved to be more than just a painter. He'd check in during his work on the exterior, mentioning other issues he'd noticed, a loose board on the porch, a downspout that needed adjusting. He never asked for extra payment, just fixed things with the casual competence of someone who couldn't stand to see problems left unaddressed. "You're going above and beyond your estimate," I told him one day, watching him repair lattice that wasn't technically part of the painting contract. He shrugged, wiping sweat from his forehead. "It's a good house. Deserves to be taken care of properly. Plus, Ms. Diana makes incredible coffee, and always has some waiting when I show up in the morning. That's payment enough." I noticed the slight color in his cheeks when he mentioned Diana, noticed too the way Diana's face brightened when Marcus's van pulled into the driveway each morning. I said nothing, but felt a small glow of satisfaction at the possibility of unexpected connections forming. The legal pursuit of Richard Patterson became my obsession during those weeks. I filed complaints with the State Bar Association, with the District Attorney's Office, with every regulatory body I could find. I hired my own lawyer, a fierce woman named Jennifer Park who specialized in fraud cases and pursued Patterson's trail with the determination of a bloodhound. "He's done this before," Jennifer told me during one of our meetings, spreading out files from 3 other victims she'd uncovered. Different cities, different schemes, but always targeting vulnerable people. Single mothers, elderly widows, recent immigrants. People who trust professionals and don't have the resources to fight back effectively. "But we're going to fight back," I said, and it wasn't a question. "Oh, we're definitely going to fight back," Jennifer agreed with a predatory smile. "I've got connections with investigative journalists who would love this story. Let's see how Mr. Patterson likes having his face and his crimes on the evening news." The story broke on a Tuesday evening, 6 weeks after Marcus's initial phone call. The local news station ran a full exposé on Patterson's schemes, featuring interviews with Diana and 2 other victims Jennifer had found, along with my own account. The reporter had done excellent research, tracking Patterson's history through 3 states and at least a dozen victims. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The district attorney's office, suddenly motivated by public attention, announced a full investigation. The state bar moved to permanently revoke Patterson's license. And most surprisingly, a tip line set up by the news station led to Patterson's location, a budget motel in Nevada where he was apparently setting up his next con. He was arrested 3 days later. The news showed footage of him being let out in handcuffs, no longer the polished professional who'd sat in my mother's living room months ago, helping settle her estate while apparently already planning how to profit from her death. Jennifer called me the day after the arrest. The DA is talking about offering a deal if Patterson makes full restitution to all victims. He apparently has money hidden in several accounts. You and Diana will likely get most of your losses back. I called Diana immediately with the news. Her cry of relief and joy made me tear up in the middle of my office, not caring who saw. "Helen, I can't believe it," she said through tears. "That money, it means I can start saving again. Maybe even think about going back to school, finishing the degree I had to drop out of when I got pregnant with Isabel. You'd make an excellent whatever you want to be," I told her sincerely. The weeks continued to pass, marked by transformation both literal and figurative. The house's exterior went from tired and flaking to crisp and fresh, painted in historically appropriate colors that honored its craftsman origins while looking thoroughly modern. The kitchen emerged from its renovation gleaming with new counters and refinished cabinets. The bathroom sparkled with updated fixtures and that salvaged tile that Diana had found. My brother Nathan, when he finally visited from Seattle to see the progress, walked through the house in stunned silence. "Helen, this is incredible. The realtor is going to be thrilled. We'll probably get offers well above asking price." "About that," I said, and proceeded to explain the entire situation, from Patterson's fraud to Diana's occupancy to my decision to let her family stay throughout the renovation. Nathan listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, looking around the living room where we'd spent countless childhood hours. "You know what's funny?" he finally said. "I was so focused on settling the estate quickly because I thought that's what Mom would have wanted. Efficiency, practicality, getting things wrapped up neatly. But you actually understood her better than I did. She would have done exactly what you're doing." Relief flooded through me. "You're not angry?" "Angry? Helen, I'm impressed. And humbled." He smiled. "Though I have to ask, what happens when the house does sell? Diana and her kids can't stay indefinitely." "I've been thinking about that," I admitted. "Actually, I've been thinking about a lot of things. What I'd been thinking about was this. In the months since my mother's death, I'd been living in my small apartment across town, going through the motions of my comfortable but not particularly fulfilling job in corporate human resources, existing rather than truly living. The hours spent at the Riverside house working on renovations, talking with Diana, getting to know her children, had awakened something in me that I'd thought died with my mother. Purpose, maybe, or connection, or the simple satisfaction of building something meaningful. The house, with its renovations nearly complete, was worth more than ever. But I found myself increasingly reluctant to list it. Not because of sentimentality, though that played a role, but because I'd begun to envision a different possibility. What if I didn't sell? I said to Nathan, "What if I moved in instead?" He raised his eyebrows. "You want to live here? But your job, your apartment, everything is across town." "My lease is up in 2 months, I pointed out. "And my job, let's be honest, I've been phoning it in for years. Mom always said I ended up in HR because it seemed like a safe career, not because I was passionate about it." She was right. "So what would you do instead?" Nathan asked practically. "Live in Mom's house and do what exactly?" I'd been researching this question obsessively for weeks. "Property management," I said. "Diana gave me the idea, actually. There are thousands of people like her. Working families who need decent housing but can't afford market rate, who get taken advantage of by predatory landlords and scam artists like Patterson. What if this house became the first property in a social enterprise focused on affordable housing with support services?" I could see I had Nathan's attention now. "Go on." "Mom left us this house plus about $200,000 in liquid assets, split between us. What if I bought out your half of the house? Used that capital plus my savings to establish the foundation and started small. Diana and her family become my first official tenants at genuinely affordable rates. I use my HR background to help her and other tenants access job training, financial literacy programs, support services. The house generates some income, but more importantly, it becomes proof of concept for a sustainable model. Nathan walked over to the window, looking out at the garden Diana had restored. You've really thought this through. I've thought about little else for weeks, I admitted. I know it's risky. I know it's not the practical choice. But Nathan, I've spent my whole life making practical choices, and where has it gotten me? A job I'm ambivalent about, an apartment that never felt like home, a life that's perfectly fine but perfectly empty. This feels right in a way nothing has since Mom died. What does Diana think about all this? He asked. I haven't told her yet, I said. I wanted to talk to you first, make sure you weren't completely opposed to the idea. Nathan turned from the window, a slow smile spreading across his face. You know what Mom used to say? That I got her practical sense but you got her heart. I thought she was just being sentimental, but she was right. You got the part of her that mattered most. He walked over and pulled me into a hug. Buy me out. Start your foundation. Do this crazy beautiful thing that Mom would absolutely love. I'll even help with the initial business planning if you want. I am an accountant after all. Telling Diana was harder than telling Nathan, because I worried she'd think I was doing this out of pity, or that she'd feel obligated to participate in something she wasn't comfortable with. I waited until a Saturday afternoon when her kids were at various activities, when we could talk uninterrupted over coffee at the kitchen table. Diana, I want to run something by you, I started. And I need you to be completely honest about your reaction, because this only works if it's something you genuinely want, not something you feel pressured into. I explained my vision for the house, for the foundation, for creating a model of supportive affordable housing that could potentially grow beyond this single property. I talked about my plan to move in myself, to have my own space on the upper floor while Diana and her family continued to occupy the main level, at least initially. Eventually, if this works, we'd acquire other properties, I explained. You and your kids might move to one of those or stay here, whatever makes sense. But the core idea is this: stable, affordable housing paired with access to resources that help families build toward true financial security. Diana was quiet for so long I thought I'd made a terrible mistake. Then she started crying. Not the sad tears I'd seen before, but something different. Helen, do you know what you're describing? She said through tears. You're describing the kind of place I've needed since my divorce. The kind of place that could have saved me years of struggle and desperation. The kind of place that could have prevented me from being vulnerable to someone like Patterson in the first place. So you think it could work? I asked hopefully. I think it could change lives, she said firmly. And if you're serious about this, if you really want to do this, then I want to help. Not just as a tenant, but as part of the team. I have medical billing experience, office management skills. I know what it's like to navigate social services and support systems. I could be useful. You'd want to work for the foundation? I was surprised but pleased. Helen, you're offering me more than housing. You're offering me purpose, the chance to help other families avoid what my children and I went through. Yes, I want to work for the foundation. I want to be part of building something that matters. We talked for hours that afternoon, sketching out ideas, identifying challenges, dreaming about possibilities. By the time her children came home, we'd filled a dozen pages with notes and had laughed and cried, and felt the intoxicating thrill of building something new. The next months were a whirlwind of paperwork and planning. Jennifer Park helped me establish the foundation as a proper nonprofit entity. Nathan consulted on financial structures and sustainability models. Marcus, who'd become a regular presence even after his painting work was done, offered to serve on the advisory board and provide property maintenance services at reduced rates. Plus, he admitted with that now familiar blush, I've gotten kind of attached to this place. And to the people in it. Diana's smile when he said that could have lit up the entire house. I gave notice at my corporate job, packed up my apartment, and moved into the upper floor of the Riverside house on a crisp October morning, exactly 6 months after Marcus's phone call had upended my life. Isabel and Marco helped carry boxes while Sophie directed placement with the authority of an interior designer. That chair should go by the window, she instructed, pointing to my reading chair, the one I'd saved from my apartment. You'll want to look at the garden while you read. She was right, of course. The view of Diana's restored garden from that window became my favorite spot in the house. The foundation, officially named the Margaret Chun Housing Initiative after my mother, opened its doors to its first official tenant program in December. Diana managed day-to-day operations while I focused on fundraising and partnership development. We screened applications carefully, looking for families like Diana's had been, working people who needed a hand up, not a handout, who would benefit from stability and support. By the time the new year arrived, we'd helped place 3 additional families in shared housing arrangements, partnering with other property owners who believed in our mission. We'd established relationships with job training programs, financial counselors, and family support services. We weren't changing the world, not yet, but we were changing lives one family at a time. On a cold January evening, almost a year after my mother's death, I sat in that reading chair by the window, looking out at the garden where early daffodils were already pushing through the soil. From downstairs, I could hear Diana's family, the sound of laughter and conversation, Marco explaining something technical to his mother, while Isabel argued good-naturedly with Sophie about whose turn it was to choose the movie. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Dinner tomorrow? There's a new Italian place I want to try. He'd been asking me to dinner more frequently lately, and I'd been saying yes more frequently. Maybe something would come of it, maybe not, but I was learning to embrace uncertainty rather than fear it. I thought about that morning a year ago, about Marcus's worried phone call, about my panic at discovering an intruder in my mother's house, about how what seemed like a catastrophe had actually been an opportunity disguised as chaos, about how my mother's death, as painful as it had been, had paradoxically given me permission to finally live the kind of life she'd always modeled but that I'd been too cautious to embrace. The house that was supposed to be sold, the property that was meant to be converted to cash and divided between siblings, had instead become something far more valuable. It had become a home again, not just for Diana and her children, but for me, for the possibility of community and purpose and the kind of generosity that multiplies rather than diminishes. I picked up the framed watercolor Sophie had painted, the one that hung on my wall, and really looked at it. She'd captured the house at sunset, warm light spilling from the windows, the garden in full bloom, and something else too, something that looked like welcome, like safety, like home. Mom would have loved it. More than that, she would have loved what her house, her legacy, had become. Not an asset to be liquidated, but a foundation for something bigger than any of us individually, a testament to the radical idea that sometimes the most practical choice is also the most generous one. Downstairs, Diana called up the stairs. Helen, we're about to start the movie. Sophie's choice tonight, so it's probably something animated. You want to join us? I'll be right down, I called back, setting aside Sophie's painting and heading toward the sound of family, toward the life I'd accidentally discovered when a painter called to report an intruder who turned out to be a blessing. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I paused by the photograph of my mother that now hung in the front hallway, the one where she was standing in her garden, her hands full of roses, her smile radiant with the particular joy of someone who'd built something beautiful through determination and faith. Thank you, I whispered to her image, for everything. For showing me that home isn't about property ownership or estate planning. It's about what we build together, about who we choose to welcome, about having the courage to turn crisis into opportunity. The photograph didn't answer, of course, but in the reflection of the glass, I caught sight of myself, and for the first time in years, I recognized the woman looking back at me. She looked like her mother, not just in features, but in purpose and determination, and the kind of happiness that comes from living according to your deepest values rather than your most cautious fears. From the living room, Sophie called out, Helen, hurry up. The movie's starting. Coming, I said, taking one last look at my mother's photograph before joining the family that had formed from fraud and chaos and unexpected grace. Because that's what home really is, not a structure you inherit or purchase, but a collection of people you choose and who choose you back, who transform houses into havens and strangers into family, who teach you that sometimes the best investment isn't the one that makes financial sense, but the one that makes your heart sense, the one that honors the legacy of love rather than the logic of loss. And in the end, that phone call from Marcus, that moment of panic and confusion, had led me exactly where I needed to be. Home. The first board meeting of the Margaret Chen Housing Initiative took place on a rainy February evening, in what had once been my mother's dining room. We'd converted the space into a modest office, with a long table salvaged from a restaurant supply auction and mismatched chairs that Diana had reupholstered herself during late nights after her kids went to bed. The walls held framed mission statements, demographic maps of the city showing affordable housing deserts, and Sophie's artwork depicting families in various stages of finding home. Around the table sat an unlikely collection of allies we'd assembled over the past months. Marcus, who'd transitioned from painter to property maintenance coordinator, his work clothes traded for business casual that he wore with obvious discomfort. Jennifer Park, the lawyer who'd helped us pursue Patterson, and who'd agreed to serve as our legal counsel pro bono. Father Miguel Santos from St. Catherine's Parish, whose church had been providing emergency housing assistance for decades, and who saw our initiative as a potential partner rather than competition. Dr. Yolanda Reeves, a housing policy professor from the State University who'd reached out after reading about our work in a local newsletter. And Nathan, attending via video call from Seattle, his face pixelated but his enthusiasm clear even through the unstable connection. Diana sat to my right, a notebook open in front of her filled with her careful handwriting. She'd spent the past week preparing reports on our current operations, analyzing what was working and what needed adjustment. In the months since she transitioned from tenant to employee, she'd proven herself to be exceptionally organized and thoughtful, able to balance compassion for families in crisis with the practical requirements of running a sustainable operation. Let's start with the numbers, I said, calling the meeting to order. Diana, can you walk us through where we stand financially? She nodded, consulting her notes. We currently have 4 families in our program across 3 properties. The Riverside house where Isabel, Marco, Sophie, and I live alongside Helen, the duplex on Maplewood that we're leasing from Mrs. Patterson, no relation to Richard, thankfully, and the converted carriage house behind Father Miguel's church. Total monthly rent collected is $2,800. Our expenses, including property maintenance, insurance, utilities for common areas, and program operations, run about $3,200 monthly. So we're operating at a $400 deficit each month, which we're currently covering through the initial foundation capital and donations, I added. But obviously that's not sustainable long term. Nathan, you had some thoughts on this. Nathan's voice crackled through the speakers. Right, so I've been running projections based on different growth scenarios. If you can acquire 2 more properties within the next 6 months and fill them with tenants paying similar rates, you'd reach operational break-even. Add a 3rd property within a year, and you'd have enough surplus to start building reserves for emergency repairs and program expansion. The challenge, Dr. Reeves interjected, her academic precision evident in her careful word choice, is that acquiring properties requires capital you don't currently have. You've been fortunate with the duplex owner being willing to lease to you at favorable terms, but that's not a scalable model. You need to either find investors willing to provide property acquisition funds, or explore alternative financing mechanisms. Father Miguel leaned forward, his weathered hands clasped on the table. What about the old Morrison building? I heard the owner passed away last month, and the family is looking to sell. It's a 4-unit apartment building. Needs work but structurally sound. Been sitting empty for 2 years because the owner didn't want to deal with tenants anymore. I felt a familiar flutter of possibility mixed with terror. Do you know what they're asking? I can find out, Father Miguel said. The daughter, Patricia Morrison, she's in my congregation. Good woman, cares more about finding a responsible buyer than maximizing profit. Might be willing to work with you. We should pursue it, Marcus said, speaking up for the first time. He still seemed uncomfortable in these formal settings, more at ease with a paintbrush than a boardroom discussion. I drove by that building last week. Yeah, it needs work but nothing structural. Mostly cosmetic updates, some plumbing repairs, electrical modernization. I could do a lot of the labor myself, keep costs down. Jennifer Park had been taking notes throughout the discussion. If you're serious about acquiring a property, you'll need to formalize your financing structure. Have you considered applying for grants from housing-focused foundations? Or approaching impact investors who prioritize social returns alongside financial ones? I've researched grant opportunities, I admitted. Most require you to have been operating for at least a year and show measurable outcomes. We're too new for most traditional funding sources. Then we need to get creative, Dr. Reeves said, and something in her tone suggested she had an idea brewing. Helen, would you be open to turning this into a case study for my housing policy seminar? My students are required to complete a practicum where they work with real organizations on real challenges. You'd get free consulting from some very bright graduate students, and they'd get hands-on experience with innovative housing models. That could be incredibly helpful, Diana said before I could respond. We've been making decisions based on instinct and research, but having experts analyze what we're doing could help us avoid mistakes and identify opportunities we're missing. The conversation continued for another 2 hours, ranging from operational details to philosophical questions about our mission and methods. Should we expand our eligibility criteria to include seniors on fixed incomes? What about families with past evictions or criminal records? How did we balance being accessible with being sustainable? These weren't easy questions and we didn't arrive at easy answers, but the discussion itself felt valuable, like we were building something thoughtful rather than just reacting to immediate needs. After the meeting ended and everyone had departed except Diana and Marcus, who lingered to help fold chairs and clean up, I stood at the window looking out at the garden. The rain had stopped, leaving everything glistening in the streetlight glow. Diana's roses, the ones she'd revived from my mother's neglected beds, showed the first hints of spring growth despite the winter chill. You're worried, Diana observed, coming to stand beside me. I can tell. I'm terrified, I corrected. What if we can't make this work? What if I've built something that helps a handful of families for a few months before collapsing because we run out of money? What if you have? Marcus asked, joining us at the window. Would that make it not worth doing? I turned to look at him, surprised by the question. My mom used to volunteer at a homeless shelter, he continued. Every night she was there, she'd make sandwiches for maybe 30 people. Compared to the thousands of people experiencing homelessness in the city, 30 sandwiches is nothing. But she'd say, it's everything to the 30 people who eat them. You're doing more than making sandwiches, Helen. You're giving families like Diana's a real chance to stabilize and build towards something better. Even if it only lasts for the families you've already helped, that's not nothing. Diana reached over and squeezed my hand. Plus, you're forgetting something important. You're not doing this alone. You've built a team of people who believe in this mission. We'll figure out the financing. We'll make it sustainable. Because the alternative, going back to a world where families like mine are prey for people like Patterson, that's not acceptable. Her fierce determination reminded me why I'd taken this risk in the first place. Diana wasn't just an employee or a tenant. She'd become a friend, a partner in building something that neither of us could have created alone. And Marcus, who'd started as simply the painter I'd hired to refresh the exterior, had become part of our small family too, his quiet competence and steady presence a constant source of support. Okay, I said, feeling some of the anxiety ease. We pursue the Morrison building. Diana, can you work with Father Miguel to set up a meeting with Patricia Morrison? Marcus, would you be willing to do a property assessment so we know what we're getting into? And I'll reach out to Dr. Reeves about the student practicum and start researching alternative financing options. They both nodded, and we spent another hour sketching out next steps before finally calling it a night. After they left, Diana heading upstairs to her family and Marcus driving home to his apartment across town, I sat alone in the converted dining room office, surrounded by the evidence of what we were attempting to build. My phone buzzed with a message from Nathan. Proud of you, sis. Mom would be too. Let me know if you need me to run more financial projections, or if I can help in other ways. I typed back a quick thank you, then scrolled through my emails, finding one from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Saw your story on the news." I opened it cautiously, half expecting spam or criticism. Instead, I found a message from a woman named Teresa Holbrook. Miss Chun, I'm writing because I recently saw a news segment about the Margaret Chin Housing Initiative and was deeply moved by your work. My late husband and I spent years investing in real estate, and since his death 3 years ago, I've been looking for meaningful ways to use our portfolio to benefit the community. I own several properties that might be suitable for your program, and I'd like to discuss the possibility of donating one or more of them to your foundation. Please contact me at your earliest convenience. I read the email 3 times, certain I must be misunderstanding. People didn't just donate properties to fledgling nonprofits run by former HR professionals with no housing experience. But there was a phone number at the bottom of the email, and a request for a meeting. My hands were shaking slightly as I forwarded the email to Diana and Jennifer Park with a note asking if this seemed legitimate or too good to be true. Then I sat back in my chair, looking around the office that had been my mother's dining room, where she'd hosted Thanksgiving dinners and birthday celebrations and ordinary weeknight meals that had shaped my understanding of what family meant. Is this really happening, Mom? I whispered to the empty room. Are we actually building something that could work? The room didn't answer, but in the silence I felt something shift. Not certainty exactly, but a growing sense that maybe, just maybe, we were on the right path. That the phone call from Marcus a year ago, the one that had seemed like a disaster, had actually been the beginning of something important. That my mother's death, as painful as it remained, had created space for a different kind of legacy than either of us had imagined. The next morning, Diana knocked on my door at 7, earlier than usual, still in her pajamas but with an expression of barely contained excitement. Did you see that email? Helen, did you actually read what that woman is offering? I read it, I said, letting her into my small living room. But Diana, it seems impossible. Why would someone just donate property to us? Because not everyone is Richard Patterson, she said firmly. Because some people actually want to do good with their resources. Because your mother's name on this foundation means something. Because what we're doing matters, and apparently some people recognize that. She was right, of course. I'd become so accustomed to expecting obstacles and challenges that I'd forgotten to watch for opportunities and support. I'll call her this morning, I decided. Set up a meeting. But Diana, we need to be careful. We need Jennifer there to review any legal implications. We need to make sure this is legitimate. Absolutely, Diana agreed. But Helen, can we also just be excited for a minute? Can we just acknowledge that maybe the universe is conspiring to help us rather than hinder us? I found myself smiling despite my caution. Okay, for 1 minute we can be excited. Diana hooped and did a little dance right there in my living room, and I couldn't help but laugh. Her joy was infectious, her belief in the possibility of good things happening almost childlike in its purity. It was one of the things I'd come to love about her. The way hardship hadn't crushed her optimism but had instead refined it into something stronger and more resilient than naive hope. The call with Teresa Holbrook, when I finally worked up the courage to make it later that morning, exceeded even Diana's optimistic expectations. Mrs. Holbrook was in her early 70s, her voice warm and surprisingly youthful, with the kind of directness I associated with people who'd lived long enough to stop wasting time on pleasantries. Miss Chun, thank you for calling back so promptly. Let me be direct about what I'm proposing. My husband Gerald and I spent 40 years building a real estate portfolio. We were good at it, frankly. Made more money than we needed. Gerald passed 3 years ago, and since then I've been thinking about legacy. Not the kind where your name goes on a building, but the kind where your resources actually change lives. I appreciate your transparency, Mrs. Holbrook, I said, making notes as she spoke. Can I ask what specifically drew you to our work? 2 things, she said without hesitation. First, I was scammed once years ago by someone I trusted. Lost a significant amount of money. Took us years to recover. When I saw the news story about that lawyer who defrauded you and Diana Rosales, I recognized that particular kind of violation. The way it shakes your faith in people and systems. Second, I like your model. You're not running a charity that creates dependency. You're providing stability that allows families to build toward self-sufficiency. That's smart. We talked for over an hour. Mrs. Holbrook explained that she owns 6 residential properties in the city, all currently rented at market rates through a property management company. She was considering donating 2 of them to the foundation, an 8-unit apartment building that was well-maintained and currently occupied, and a duplex that was between tenants and needed some updating. The apartment building generates about $60,000 annually in rental income after expenses, she explained. If we transfer it to your foundation, you'd inherit the existing tenants and their leases, but as those leases expire, you could transition units to your program model. The duplex is more immediately available for your use. The numbers were staggering. With those properties, we'd more than triple our capacity and have significant operational income to build reserves and fund program expansion. It seemed impossible, yet Mrs. Holbrook discussed it with the casual practicality of someone accustomed to making major financial decisions. I'd want to be involved, she added. Not in day-to-day operations, but as an advisor. I know property management. I know real estate markets. I could be useful to you, and frankly, I'm bored. My children don't need my help anymore. I've traveled everywhere I want to go, and charity luncheons make me want to scream. Give me something meaningful to do with my remaining years. Mrs. Holbrook, I think we'd be honored to have your involvement, I said, meaning it completely. But I need to be transparent with you as well. We're a very new organization. We're figuring things out as we go. We make mistakes. We're going to continue making mistakes. If you're looking for a polished professional operation, we're not there yet. Her laugh was full and genuine. My dear, if I wanted polished and professional, I'd donate to one of the established housing nonprofits with boards full of wealthy people patting themselves on the back for their generosity. I'm interested in you precisely because you're figuring it out as you go. Because you're nimble enough to innovate and small enough to actually know the families you're serving. Now, when can we meet in person? I'd like to see your operation firsthand. We scheduled a meeting for the following week, agreeing that Diana, Jennifer Park, and I would visit Mrs. Holbrook at her home to discuss details and review the properties she was considering donating. After the call ended, I sat in stunned silence for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. Diana appeared in the doorway as if summoned by telepathy. Well? What did she say? She wants to donate 2 properties, I said, still not quite believing it. An 8-unit apartment building and a duplex. And she wants to be actively involved as an advisor. Diana screamed, actually screamed with joy, bringing Isabel, Marco, and Sophie running from their various corners of the house to see what was wrong. When Diana explained, Sophie immediately declared we needed to celebrate with ice cream for breakfast. A suggestion that was met with enthusiastic agreement from her siblings and zero objection from the adults. We piled into my car and drove to the local ice cream shop that opened early to serve the morning crowd. Sitting around a wobbly outdoor table in the weak February sunshine, eating ice cream at 9 in the morning while Diana's children talked excitedly about what this meant for the foundation, I felt a surge of pure happiness. Not the cautious, qualified happiness I'd become accustomed to, but the uncomplicated kind I remembered from childhood. Can we paint murals on the new buildings? Sophie asked, chocolate chips smeared across her chin. Like, art that represents different families and cultures and stuff? I think that's a beautiful idea, I told her. Maybe we could involve the families living there. Make it a collaborative project. Marco, ever practical like his mother, was already pulling out his phone to research property management software. If you're going to have multiple properties with multiple units, you need better systems for tracking maintenance requests and rent payments. I could build something actually. I've been learning database design in my coding class. Marco, that would be incredibly helpful, I said, continually amazed by this young person's capabilities. At 14, he was already thinking systemically about problems and solutions, his mind naturally gravitating toward efficiency and optimization. Isabel was quieter, but I caught her watching her mother with an expression of profound relief and pride. She'd been carrying so much weight during the difficult years before they'd found their way to the Riverside house, taking on responsibilities no teenager should have to bear. Watching her mother thrive in this new role, seeing their family stabilize and even flourish, had allowed Isabel to finally be a teenager again. Mom, Isabel said softly, I'm really proud of you, of everything you're doing with Helen. Diana's eyes filled with tears. She reached across the table to take her daughter's hand. Baby, none of this would be possible without you. You held our family together when I was falling apart. You took care of your siblings when I was working 2 jobs and could barely function. This, what we have now, is as much your doing as mine. The moment was tender and private, and I felt like I was intruding. But then Diana reached out with her other hand to grab mine, pulling me into the family circle. And you, Helen Chun, you took a terrible situation and turned it into something beautiful. You didn't have to do any of this. You could have just evicted us and sold your mother's house and gone back to your comfortable life. But you didn't. You chose differently. We all chose differently, I said, my own voice thick with emotion. That's what makes this work. It's not me saving you or you helping me. It's all of us building something together that none of us could have built alone. Sophie, with the emotional intelligence that seemed to come naturally to her, sensed the moment needed lightning. So does this mean we're definitely getting that ice cream maker you said we couldn't afford? Because if the foundation is getting all this money, I think an ice cream maker is a reasonable operational expense. The laughter broke the emotional tension, and we spent the rest of our breakfast celebration discussing the completely unreasonable things we'd like to purchase with the foundation's newfound resources. A pet llama for the garden, a fully stocked art studio, pizza oven, a trampoline. The absurdity was healing, a reminder that for all the serious work we were doing, there was still room for joy and silliness, and the kind of impossible dreams that make life interesting. The meeting with Mrs. Holbrook the following week was scheduled for a Wednesday afternoon. Jennifer Park met Diana and me at Mrs. Holbrook's address, a stately Victorian in one of the city's historic neighborhoods, the kind of house that spoke of old money and careful preservation. I felt intimidated just walking up the front path, but Jennifer seemed perfectly at ease. Remember, Jennifer said quietly as we approached the door, she came to you. She wants to do this. Don't act grateful to the point of being obsequious. Be professional, be honest about your capabilities and limitations, and let her decide if this is the right fit. Mrs. Holbrook answered the door herself, no staff or formality, just a tall woman with white hair cut in a sharp bob and eyes that missed nothing. She wore jeans and a cashmere sweater, pearls that were probably real, and the kind of confidence that comes from decades of making your own decisions. You must be Helen, she said, extending her hand. And Diana and Jennifer. Come in, please. I've made tea unless you prefer coffee. Or something stronger, though it's a bit early for that. Her home was beautiful in an understated way, filled with art that looked original and furniture that had clearly been chosen for comfort as much as aesthetics. She led us to a sunroom overlooking a garden that rivaled Diana's restoration work at the Riverside house, gesturing for us to sit in cushioned wicker chairs arranged around a glass table. Before we talk business, Mrs. Holbrook said, pouring tea from a pot that might have been antique or might have been from Target, I couldn't tell, I want to hear your stories. The news covered the basics, but I want to understand who you are and why you're doing this. Diana, let's start with you. What followed was one of the most extraordinary conversations I'd ever been part of. Diana shared her story with an honesty that was both painful and powerful. The divorce that had shattered her financial stability. The years of struggle, working multiple jobs while trying to be present for her children. The desperation that had made her vulnerable to Patterson's scheme. The unexpected grace of finding not just housing but purpose and partnership with me and the foundation. Mrs. Holbrook listened without interruption, her expression neutral but her attention absolute. When Diana finished, Mrs. Holbrook turned to me. And you, Helen? What's your story? I talked about my mother, about the grief that had paralyzed me after her death, about the comfortable but unfulfilling life I'd been living before Marcus's phone call changed everything. I talked about the moment on the porch swing when I decided not to evict Diana, but to create something different. About my mother's values and how this work felt like honoring her in a way that went beyond maintaining her property or preserving her memory. You were in human resources, Mrs. Holbrook observed. Corporate HR for a mid-sized company. If I remember the news story correctly. That's quite a career change. It is, I agreed. And honestly, there are days when I miss the simplicity of that life. A predictable paycheck, clear responsibilities, the ability to clock out at 5 and not think about work until the next morning. This is harder in every way. But it's also infinitely more meaningful. Mrs. Holbrook nodded slowly, then turned to Jennifer. And you, counselor? What's your interest in this project? Jennifer set down her teacup with careful precision. I'm tired of watching predators exploit vulnerable people. I've spent years in civil litigation, representing clients who've been defrauded by people they trusted. Patterson is just one example of a much larger problem. The Margaret Chun Housing Initiative isn't going to solve systemic issues of affordable housing or economic inequality, but it's doing something concrete and immediate for real families. That's rare enough to be worth supporting. Good answer, Mrs. Holbrook said with what might have been approval. Now let's talk about what I'm proposing and what I expect in return. She pulled out a folder containing detailed information on the 2 properties she was considering donating. The 8-unit apartment building was in a stable working-class neighborhood, well-maintained with long-term tenants who rarely had issues. The duplex needed work but was in a neighborhood experiencing gentrification, which meant its value would likely appreciate significantly over the next decade. If I donate these properties to your foundation, I want several things in return, Mrs. Holbrook said with businesslike directness. First, I want to serve on your board of directors. I want genuine involvement in strategic decisions, not just a name on letterhead. Second, I want quarterly reports on how the properties are being used, how the program is serving families, measurable outcomes and honest assessments of challenges. Third, I want the freedom to walk away if I determine you're not managing things responsibly. These are valuable assets, and while I believe in your mission, I won't let sentimentality override good judgment. Those all seem entirely reasonable, I said, looking to Jennifer and Diana for confirmation. They both nodded. There's one more condition, Mrs. Holbrook continued. I want you to think bigger. You're calling this the Margaret Chun Housing Initiative, which suggests you see it as one initiative among many. I want you to consider that this could be your life's work. That you could spend the next 20 or 30 years building an organization that fundamentally changes how we approach affordable housing in this city. Are you prepared for that level of commitment? The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Was I prepared to commit decades of my life to this work? To make it my identity and my purpose? To accept that I'd probably never have the financial security or professional predictability I'd walked away from? I thought about my mother, about the life she built through determination and sacrifice, about Diana and her children, about the families we were already serving and the dozens or hundreds more we could potentially help, about waking up each morning with a sense of purpose rather than just going through motions. Yes, I said simply. I'm prepared for that commitment. Mrs. Holbrook smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her austere features. Good. Then let's make this happen. Jennifer, I assume you'll want to review all the legal documentation. Diana, I'd like you to arrange for me to visit each of your current properties so I can see your operations firsthand. And Helen, I want you to start thinking about a 5-year strategic plan. If we're doing this, we're doing it properly. The rest of the meeting covered practical details, timelines for property transfer, tax implications, operational transitions for the existing tenants in the apartment building. Mrs. Holbrook, it became clear, had already done extensive research and planning. This wasn't an impulsive decision, but a carefully considered move by someone who'd spent a lifetime making smart investments. As we prepared to leave, Mrs. Holbrook walked us to the door, then paused with her hand on the knob. One more thing. Call me Teresa. Mrs. Holbrook was my mother-in-law, and while I loved her dearly, I don't need to be reminded of her every time you address me. Thank you, Teresa, I said, and somehow that simple permission to use her first name felt like a seal on our partnership. The drive back to the Riverside house was filled with excited chatter and planning. Diana was already thinking about how to welcome Teresa into the organization without making her feel like an outsider. Jennifer was mentally cataloging the legal work that would need to be done, and I was simply trying to process that our small struggling initiative was about to expand in ways I'd barely allowed myself to hope for. Marcus was waiting at the house when we arrived, having let himself in with the key we'd given him months ago. He'd become such a regular presence that we'd stopped thinking of him as a visitor, and more as an unofficial member of our household. He was in the kitchen helping Marco install a new faucet. The two of them engaged in what appeared to be a serious discussion about water pressure and pipe configurations. How'd it go? Marcus asked when we walked in, wiping his hands on a towel. She's donating 2 properties, Diana said, her excitement bubbling over again. An 8-unit apartment building and a duplex. And she wants to be actively involved on our board. Marcus's face split into a wide grin. That's incredible. So we're really doing this? We're actually building something sustainable. Looks like it, I said, feeling the weight and wonder of it. Which means we need to get serious about systems and processes, and all the things we've been putting off because we were too busy just trying to survive day to day. The conversation continued as others joined us. Isabel came down from her room where she'd been studying. Sophie abandoned her art project to hear the news. Even the neighbor, old Mrs. Chun, no relation, who'd been watching our renovation and organization efforts with interest, stopped by with a plate of cookies and stayed to hear about our expansion. That evening, after everyone had left or retreated to their own spaces, I found myself again in that reading chair by the window, looking out at Diana's garden where the earliest signs of spring were beginning to show. My phone held dozens of messages, congratulations from Nathan, questions from Father Miguel about how this would impact our partnership with the church, a practical note from Jennifer about scheduling a property inspection. But beyond all the logistics and planning, I felt something deeper settling into place. A sense of rightness that had eluded me for most of my adult life. The realization that sometimes the worst moments open doors to the best possibilities, that crisis can be the catalyst for transformation, if we're brave enough to see it not as disaster but as invitation. I thought about that morning when Marcus called, the panic I'd felt hearing that someone was in my mother's house. If I'd known then where that phone call would lead, would I have believed it? That the intruder would become family? That the house I'd planned to sell would become the foundation for meaningful work? That grief would eventually transform into purpose? A soft knock interrupted my reflection. Diana stood in the doorway holding 2 mugs of tea, her expression knowing. She handed me one and settled into the chair beside mine, both of us looking out at the garden where moonlight silvered the leaves. "You're thinking about your mom," she said. It wasn't a question. I'm thinking about how she'd react to all this. The foundation, Teresa's donation, everything we're building. I think she'd be amazed. Diana smiled. I think she knew exactly what she was doing when she raised you. She taught you to see people, really see them, not just their circumstances. That's why you didn't evict us. That's why this works. We sat in comfortable silence, sipping tea and watching the night settle over the neighborhood that had become home to both of us in different ways. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more paperwork, strategic planning sessions, the complex work of actually managing multiple properties and serving multiple families. But tonight, in this quiet moment, there was just gratitude. "Thank you," I said finally, "for taking a chance on staying when you could have just left. For believing this could be something more than just housing. Thank you for seeing possibility instead of problems," Diana replied. "For choosing generosity when you could have chosen anger. For building something that gives families like mine not just shelter but dignity." Later, alone in my room, I pulled out my mother's journal one more time, reading her words about choosing to move forward rather than dwelling in bitterness. About using whatever you have to help someone who has less. About legacy being measured not in assets accumulated, but in lives touched. I picked up a pen and added my own entry on a blank page. "Mom, I finally understand what you were trying to teach me. That home isn't a place, it's what we build together. That security comes not from holding tight to what we have but from sharing it generously. That your greatest legacy wasn't the house or the money, but the example of how to live with purpose and compassion. I'm carrying it forward the best way I know how. I hope I'm making you proud." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.